The colony of Haven's Edge sat beneath 3 pale moons on the outer frontier of human space. It was not famous. No one wrote songs about it. No news networks broadcast stories from its dusty streets. It was simply one of hundreds of distant colonies scattered among the stars, a place where ordinary people had come to build ordinary lives. And that was exactly why it mattered. Nearly 60,000 settlers called Haven's Edge home. Farmers worked vast golden fields that stretched beyond the horizon. Mining crews extracted rare minerals from the Crimson Mountains to the east. Teachers filled classrooms every morning with children who had never seen Earth except in history books. The colony wasn't rich. It wasn't powerful. But it was alive. Every Sunday the central market square overflowed with people. Merchants sold fresh fruit grown in hydroponic gardens. Street musicians played beneath colorful banners. Families gathered around food stalls while children raced through the crowds laughing. Life moved slowly here. Peacefully. Exactly the way the settlers wanted it. Captain Elias Kane often spent his mornings watching the colony wake up. From the observation balcony of Fort Sentinel, the colony's small defense headquarters, he could see almost the entire valley below. The marketplace, the schools, the rivers winding through farmland, the distant glow of mining facilities in the mountains. Everything looked calm, safe, the way it had looked every day for the last 12 years. Beside him stood Lieutenant Mara Voss, his second in command. "Hard to believe we're still considered a frontier world," she said. Kane smiled. "Frontier worlds aren't supposed to stay frontiers forever." Below them, a school shuttle landed near the education district. Children poured out onto the sidewalks. Some carried books. Others carried sports equipment. A few were already running despite teachers yelling after them. Mara shook her head. "Future of humanity." "The loud part of it," Kane replied. For a moment they simply watched. Neither of them knew they were looking at a world that was about to change forever. Far beyond the colony. Beyond the outer moons. Beyond the navigation beacons that marked the edge of settled space. Something was moving. Fast. Very fast. In the orbital monitoring station above Haven's Edge, Specialist Rowan Hale stared at his sensor screen. At first he thought it was an error. A ghost signal. Space produced strange readings sometimes. He rubbed his eyes and recalibrated the sensors. The contact remained. Then another appeared. And another. His frown deepened. The objects were emerging from deep space. Not one ship. Not two. Dozens. He opened a secure channel. "Control, this is Sensor Station Aurora." The duty officer answered immediately. "Go ahead, Aurora." Rowan swallowed. His instincts suddenly felt very uneasy. "We're detecting multiple unidentified contacts approaching from Sector 12. Pause. How many contacts? Rowan zoomed the display. The computer finished processing. His face slowly lost color. The number on the screen kept rising. 23. 31. 48. 70. The system continued counting. The duty officer's voice became sharper. "Aurora, report contact strength." Rowan stared at the growing formation. The ships were moving in perfect military alignment. Every instinct he possessed screamed that something was wrong. Very wrong. Finally he answered. His voice barely above a whisper. "Control." The number climbed again. "I think we're looking at an invasion fleet." Across Haven's Edge, life continued normally. Children laughed. Farmers harvested crops. Families prepared for another peaceful evening beneath 3 pale moons. None of them knew that death was already crossing the stars toward them. And it would arrive much sooner than anyone imagined. The alarm sirens began at 8:17 local time. Across Haven's Edge, every emergency speaker activated simultaneously. The peaceful sounds of daily life vanished beneath a harsh mechanical warning that echoed through every street, school, farm, and factory. People stopped what they were doing. Children looked up. Workers froze. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Nobody on Haven's Edge had ever heard the colony-wide emergency alarm before. Captain Elias Kane was already running. By the time he reached Fort Sentinel's command center, every display in the room was glowing red. Officers crowded around sensor stations. No one was speaking. The silence itself was frightening. Kane approached the main tactical screen. For a moment he simply stared. The display showed the outer edge of the system. Hundreds of contacts. Not dozens. Hundreds. The formation stretched across thousands of kilometers of space like a dark wall moving toward the colony. Every ship maintained perfect spacing. Perfect alignment. Perfect discipline. It was not a fleet. It was an army. "What am I looking at?" Kane asked quietly. Lieutenant Maravas answered. We've confirmed 163 capital-class warships. Kane felt his stomach tighten. 163. The entire defensive force of Haven's Edge consisted of 3 orbital defense platforms, 7 patrol vessels, 280 soldiers. Against this? It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Identification. Kane asked. A communications officer swallowed hard. Their signatures matched the Xeroc Imperium. The room became even quieter. Everyone knew the name. The Xeroc Imperium had spent centuries expanding across neighboring sectors. World by world. System by system. Always demanding territory. Always testing borders. Always pushing farther. There had been diplomatic incidents before. Minor confrontations. Trade disputes. Military standoffs. But never this. Never an invasion fleet. A signal suddenly appeared on the communications console. Incoming transmission. Priority override. The enemy was calling. Put it through, Kane ordered. The screen flickered. A towering alien figure appeared. Its skin resembled dark stone. Its eyes glowed amber. Metal armor covered its broad shoulders. The being studied the humans for several seconds before speaking. The translation software converted its language into English. Citizens of Haven's Edge. You occupy territory now claimed by the Xeroc Imperium. You have 3 planetary hours to begin evacuation procedures. All military assets will disarm immediately. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Failure to comply will result in complete military action. This statement will not be repeated. The transmission ended. No threats. No shouting. No emotion. The alien spoke with the calm certainty of someone announcing tomorrow's weather. Because from their perspective the outcome was already decided. Captain Kane looked around the command center. No one needed to say what everyone was thinking. They couldn't win. The enemy fleet outnumbered them by a factor so large it barely mattered. 3 defense platforms against 163 warships. The mathematics were absurd. Contact Earth Command, Kane said. A communications officer shook his head. Already tried. What happened? Jamming. The officer pointed at the display. They started electronic suppression the moment they entered the system. Kane stared at the tactical screen. The Xeroc had planned this carefully. Every detail. Every possibility. Then another officer suddenly looked up. Captain. What? We might have one option. The officer quickly pulled up a secondary display. A compressed emergency beacon. Kane frowned. Will it get through? Maybe. Not exactly inspiring. But maybe was better than nothing. Send it. The officer immediately began typing. We'll transmit everything. Fleet numbers. Sensor data. Enemy ship signatures. The ultimatum. The colony location. Everything. The package would be tiny. Barely more than a digital scream for help. But if it escaped the jamming field, someone would hear it. Outside Fort Sentinel, panic had begun spreading. The emergency broadcast activated. Captain Kane's face appeared on every public screen. Every home. Every classroom. Every factory. Every vehicle. His voice remained calm. Far calmer than he felt. This is Captain Elias Kane. This is not a drill. All civilians are ordered to proceed immediately to designated emergency shelters. Bring emergency supplies only. Remain calm. Follow evacuation personnel. Defense forces are responding. The transmission ended. For several seconds the colony seemed frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then reality arrived. And panic followed. Parents rushed toward schools. Vehicles flooded the streets. Emergency sirens echoed through the city. The market square dissolved into chaos. Children cried. Families ran. People looked toward the sky, as if they could somehow see the warships approaching through daylight. 3 hours. That was all they had. 3 hours to save 60,000 lives. 3 hours before the Xeroc Imperium arrived. 3 hours before Haven's Edge discovered exactly what overwhelming force looked like. And in orbit above the world, 163 warships continued their silent advance. The first orbital defense platform fired exactly 29 minutes after the Xeroc ultimatum expired. It was Platform Guardian, the oldest defensive installation in the system. Its commander, Major Nathan Cole, never considered surrender. The moment the countdown reached 0, he gave the order. Fire everything. 3 massive plasma lances erupted from the station. The beams crossed millions of kilometers of empty space and slammed into the approaching enemy formation. One struck a Xerox cruiser directly. The warship vanished inside a blossom of white fire. For a single glorious moment, every human watching the battle cheered. Then reality returned. One destroyed ship. 162 remained. The enemy fleet did not alter course. It did not slow down. It simply answered. Hundreds of weapon signatures appeared across tactical displays. Then space itself seemed to ignite. The return volley crossed the distance in seconds. Major Cole watched the incoming barrage approach his station. No fear. No hesitation. Only acceptance. The tactical officer beside him whispered a prayer. The station disappeared before he finished it. One moment Guardian existed. The next it became expanding debris and burning metal. The largest defensive platform in the system had survived 47 years. Its destruction took less than 3 seconds. The remaining 2 stations opened fire immediately. They fought harder. Longer. More desperately. Neither survived another 10 minutes. By midday, Haven's Edge no longer possessed orbital defenses. The sky belonged to the Xerox. Inside Fort Sentinel, Captain Elias Kane studied the tactical reports arriving every minute. Each update was worse than the last. Defense Platform Guardian destroyed. Defense Platform Vanguard destroyed. Defense Platform Resolute destroyed. 4 patrol vessels lost. 2 damaged. 1 missing. Enemy casualties, negligible. The battle for space was over. The battle for the colony was about to begin. Landing craft detected, Mara announced. The main display changed. Thousands of smaller contacts were descending toward the surface. Dropships. Troop carriers. Armored transports. The invasion had begun. Kane grabbed his rifle. So this is it. Mara checked the charge level on her weapon. This is it. Around them, soldiers prepared for combat. Some looked terrified. Others looked angry. A few looked strangely calm. Everyone understood the truth. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to buy time. Every minute they delayed the enemy meant more civilians reaching shelters. Every street they defended meant more families surviving. That was enough. The first Xerox troops landed near the industrial district. The second wave struck the spaceport. The third descended directly toward the government quarter. They moved with terrifying efficiency. Towering armored figures. Nearly 3 meters tall. Covered in dark combat plating. Their weapons tore through concrete and steel alike. Human resistance met them immediately. The streets of Haven's Edge became battlefields. Gunfire echoed between buildings. Explosions shattered windows. Smoke climbed into the sky. For 6 hours the defenders refused to break. 6 hours. Against an enemy that outnumbered them dozens of times over. Captain Kane personally led counterattacks through the city center. Again and again his soldiers pushed the Xerox back. Again and again more enemy troops arrived. Every victory lasted minutes. Every sacrifice bought only moments. But those moments mattered. Deep beneath the colony, thousands of civilians continued reaching shelter complexes. Every minute mattered. Every life mattered. By evening, most of the city had fallen. Only Fort Sentinel remained. The headquarters had become a fortress. Its defenders fought from room to room, floor to floor, hallway to hallway, one position after another, until there were no positions left. Captain Kane fired his last rifle magazine defending the command center. The room around him was wrecked. Sparks rained from damaged consoles. Smoke filled the air. The walls shook with distant explosions. Lieutenant Mara Voss sat against a broken terminal nearby. Blood covered one side of her uniform. She looked exhausted. So much for retirement, she said weakly. Kane actually laughed. A short, tired laugh. Yeah. The main doors exploded inward. The Xerox had arrived. A squad of armored invaders entered through the smoke. Their leader stepped forward. The giant alien studied the wounded humans. Captain Kane slowly stood. His rifle was empty. His pistol was gone. He had nothing left. The Xerox commander noticed. For several seconds neither side moved. The battle outside continued. Distant explosions. Gunfire. Screams. The sounds of a world being conquered. Finally the alien spoke. Your resistance was irrational. Kane smiled despite the pain. No. The alien tilted its head. No. Kane thought about the shelters. The families. The children. The thousands who were still alive because soldiers had refused to quit. Then he answered. It was necessary. The Xerox commander stared at him. Neither spoke again. Moments later the humans were overwhelmed. Fort Sentinel fell. The final organized resistance on Haven's Edge ended. Night descended over the colony. The fires continued burning. Xerox banners rose above government buildings. Enemy patrols filled the streets. The invasion was complete. But deep beneath the ruined colony, tens of thousands of survivors remained hidden. And far beyond the system, a tiny emergency beacon continued racing through space, carrying one desperate message, one warning, one cry for help, toward humanity, toward home, and toward a future the Xerox Imperium could not yet imagine. The emergency beacon traveled alone through the darkness. No escort, no protection, no certainty that anyone would ever receive it. It was nothing more than a compressed packet of data moving at light speed through the vast emptiness between stars. Yet inside that tiny signal was the story of an entire world. A world under attack. A colony burning. 60,000 civilians trapped beneath an alien occupation. And one final request for help. 32 hours after Haven's Edge fell, the beacon reached Outpost Sigma. The relay station floated in deep space near the edge of human-controlled territory. Most days were quiet there. Cargo traffic. Navigation updates. Routine maintenance reports. Nothing important. Then the emergency alert appeared. The station's automated systems immediately recognized the priority code. Human military emergency. Frontier colony. Hostile military action. The relay did exactly what it had been designed to do. It forwarded the message without delay. No approval. No committee. No bureaucracy. Just speed. Because sometimes speed mattered more than anything else. 3 hours later the signal arrived at Sector Command. Admiral Sarah Holt was reviewing logistics reports when her aide entered the office. The young officer carried a printed document. That alone got her attention. Important messages appeared on screens. Critical messages arrived on paper. Admiral. The aide placed the report on her desk. You need to see this. Holt read the first page. Then the second. Then she started over and read everything again. The office became very quiet. Finally she looked up. Is this verified? Multiple confirmations. The aide swallowed. The sensor data is authentic. Admiral Holt leaned back slowly. Her eyes remained fixed on the report. Haven's Edge. Occupied. 3 defense platforms destroyed. Civilian casualties unknown. Enemy fleet strength. 163 warships. Confirmed Xerox military operation. She had spent 30 years in uniform. She had studied dozens of border incidents. Trade disputes. Pirate attacks. Political confrontations. This was different. This wasn't an incident. This was an invasion. A deliberate attack on a civilian colony. A line had been crossed. And everyone who understood history knew it. Get me General Ross. The aide immediately nodded. And Director Chin. Yes, Admiral. Within 20 minutes the 3 most powerful officials in the sector sat around a conference table. Nobody smiled. Nobody wasted time. General Marcus Ross finished reading the report and slowly placed it down. They actually did it. Director Elena Chin nodded. They did. Another silence followed. Each understood the implications. The Xerox Imperium had always pushed boundaries, tested limits, applied pressure. But they had always stopped just short of open war. Until now. General Ross folded his hands. How many survivors? Unknown. Director Chin pointed toward the casualty estimates. Most civilians reportedly reached shelter systems before the occupation. Ross nodded. Good. Then his expression hardened. But that's not the point. Everyone at the table understood. The point wasn't only what happened on Haven's Edge. The point was what it meant. If the Xerox could seize one colony without consequences, they would seize another, and another, and another. History had demonstrated that pattern repeatedly. Aggression that succeeded never stopped voluntarily. Admiral Holt stood and walked toward the large tactical display. Human territory appeared across the screen. Hundreds of colonies, trade routes, military sectors, billions of people. All connected, all vulnerable. The room remained silent. Finally Holt spoke. What happens if we do nothing? No one answered immediately. Because everyone already knew. Director Chin finally broke the silence. They'll come back. General Ross nodded. Bigger next time. Another pause. Then Holt looked at both of them. We need Earth. Neither disagreed. The report from Haven's Edge was important. The decision that followed would be far bigger. Far beyond one colony. Far beyond one sector. This was now a question for humanity itself. Within the hour, the complete data package was transmitted toward Earth. Every sensor record, every casualty estimate, every battlefield report, every second of the Xerox ultimatum. And attached to the front of the file was Admiral Holt's personal recommendation. 4 words. No explanations. No qualifications. No hesitation. Immediate strategic response required. The signal departed Sector Command, racing toward humanity's homeworld, toward the leaders who would soon be forced to make the most important decision in generations. And on occupied Haven's edge, the Xerox Imperium celebrated its victory. They believed the operation was finished. They believed the colony was theirs. They believed the consequences had already been calculated. What they didn't know was that a message was now traveling toward Earth. And with it came the first spark of something dangerous, something vast, something that would soon begin to awaken. The message reached Earth 12 hours later. It arrived in Geneva. It arrived in Washington. It arrived in New Delhi, Lagos, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Sydney, and every major governing center connected to the United Earth Authority. Within minutes, emergency meetings were called. Within an hour, the Security Council convened. By the second hour, every member understood this was no ordinary border dispute. The chamber beneath Geneva was silent as the report from Haven's Edge played across the central display. Images filled the room. Burning streets. Destroyed defense platforms. Civilian shelters. The final transmission from Fort Sentinel. And finally, the Xerox ultimatum. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted nearly 30 seconds. Secretary General Amelia Ward looked around the table. 12 representatives. 12 governments. 12 votes. Each understood the weight of what came next. Casualty estimate? She asked. The defense minister answered. Current projections suggest several thousand dead. A few council members lowered their eyes. Others stared at the display. 60,000 civilians. Families. Workers. Children. People who had simply been living their lives on a distant world. One council member finally spoke. We should pursue diplomatic channels. Several heads turned. The representative continued. The colony still exists. Survivors remain alive. If negotiations can secure their release. Another council member interrupted. The Xerox invaded sovereign territory. And war helps those civilians how? The room immediately divided. Arguments erupted. Some demanded sanctions. Others demanded military pressure. A few argued for immediate retaliation. For 3 hours the debate continued. The discussion wasn't about Haven's Edge anymore. It was about the future. If humanity responded weakly, what would happen next? Another colony? Another invasion? Another ultimatum? History offered clear answers. Aggression rewarded became aggression repeated. General Adrian Hayes sat quietly through most of the meeting. He had spent 40 years in military service. Unlike the politicians, he wasn't debating possibilities. He was evaluating probabilities. Eventually Secretary General Ward looked toward him. General. The room became quiet. You've heard the arguments. Yes. What are our options? Hayes stood. The tactical display behind him changed. A map of human-controlled space appeared. Thousands of stars. Hundreds of colonies. Dozens of military sectors. Then another image appeared. The Xerox Imperium. Large. Powerful. Expanding. The general folded his hands behind his back. We have 3 realistic options. The room listened. Option 1. The display highlighted diplomatic channels. Formal protests. Economic sanctions. Negotiations. Several representatives nodded. Hayes continued. This option avoids war. A brief pause. It also guarantees future aggression. The room became still. No one challenged him. Because the intelligence reports agreed. The general moved to the next slide. Option 2. Military deployments appeared. Border fleets. Defensive formations. Limited shows of force. We reinforce borders and issue demands. Another pause. This delays future aggression. Temporarily. A few faces hardened. They already knew where this was heading. The final slide appeared. The room fell completely silent. Fleet designations. Sector commands. Mobilization routes. Reserve formations. Shipyards. Supply chains. Everything. Option 3. General Hayes looked directly at the council. We prepare for war. No one spoke. The words hung heavily in the chamber. Secretary General Ward finally broke the silence. If we choose that option. Hayes nodded. I know. She stared at the display. How large a response are we talking about? The general looked down at his notes, then back at the room. His voice remained calm. Everything. A few council members blinked. Hayes continued. Full mobilization. All military sectors. All reserve fleets. All strategic assets. The room remained frozen. One representative finally whispered. How many ships? General Hayes answered immediately. Approximately 700,000 combat-capable vessels. No one moved. No one even breathed. 700,000. The largest military mobilization in human history. The number felt unreal. Impossible. Yet it was sitting there on the display. Waiting. Secretary General Ward slowly looked around the room. Every person understood what that number represented. Not a battle. Not a campaign. A statement. A declaration that some lines could not be crossed. The debate continued for another 2 hours. But the tone had changed. Because now everyone understood the stakes. Finally the vote was called. One by one the representatives cast their decisions. The results appeared on the central display. 11 votes. 1 abstention. 0 opposed. The resolution passed. Humanity had made its choice. Secretary General Ward stood. The room fell silent one final time. Then she spoke the words that would soon echo across hundreds of worlds. Authorize full strategic mobilization. Effective immediately. Across Earth. Across human space. Across thousands of military installations. The order began to spread. And somewhere deep inside the Xerox Imperium, an empire celebrated a conquered colony. Completely unaware that humanity had just decided to move. The mobilization order reached every military installation in human space within 6 minutes. 6 minutes. That was all it took for 700,000 warships to begin moving. At Naval Command Sector 1, warning lights illuminated entire operations floors. Across hundreds of displays, fleet statuses changed simultaneously. Reserve status active. Peacetime status, wartime status. Dock deploying. The transformation began immediately. Shipyards that had sat quiet for years came alive. Massive docking cranes moved through orbital construction platforms. Thousands of technicians reported for emergency duty. Factories switched from civilian production to military output. Supply depots unlocked strategic reserves. Fuel convoys departed. Weapons stockpiles opened. Across human space, entire worlds changed purpose overnight. Humanity was preparing for war. On Earth, General Adrian Hayes stood inside Strategic Fleet Command watching the reports arrive. Every minute brought new numbers. Sector 1 ready. Sector 2 mobilizing. Sector 3 deploying reserve assets. Sector 4 activating carrier groups. The figures climbed higher and higher. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. The scale was difficult even for experienced commanders to comprehend. Entire generations of military planners had prepared for this possibility. Not because they wanted war. Because they feared it. For more than a century, humanity had quietly built safeguards against extinction. Reserve fleets. Emergency shipyards. Mobilization protocols. Defense networks. Most politicians considered the preparations excessive. Many believed they would never be needed. Now they were being used. Exactly as intended. Far from Earth, Admiral Sarah Holt stood aboard her flagship, the UES Vanguard. The vessel was one of the largest warships ever constructed. Even so, it looked small compared to what surrounded it. Every hour more ships arrived. Destroyers, cruisers, battle carriers, drone platforms, logistics vessels, medical ships, fuel transports. The fleet kept growing. By the end of the first week, over 60,000 warships had assembled around Brennan Station alone. The sight was breathtaking. From a distance, the gathering formation looked like a second galaxy forming in space. Young officers stopped what they were doing simply to stare. Many had never seen more than a few hundred ships together. Now they were watching tens of thousands. And this was only one assembly point. There were 11 more. Across the galaxy, humanity was awakening. Lieutenant Aaron Cole stood beside an observation window aboard a carrier. The fleet stretched in every direction. Lights filled the darkness. Ships occupied volumes of space so vast that onboard computers struggled to display them accurately. "It doesn't look real," he whispered. Colonel Rebecca Vance stood beside him. 25 years of service had made her difficult to impress. Even she looked stunned. "No. Erin continued staring. How many ships are actually coming? Vance folded her arms. Latest estimate? She checked her datapad. 712,000. Erin almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the number felt impossible. No civilization should possess that much military power. No civilization should need it. Yet there it was. Moving. Growing. Preparing. The giant had awakened. Unfortunately for the Xeroc Imperium, they were beginning to notice. The first intelligence report reached Xeroc High Command 9 days after the mobilization order. Director Varric studied the document carefully. Human fleets were moving. Large fleets. Much larger than usual. At first he wasn't concerned. Military exercises happened regularly. Border deployments happened regularly. Human political theater happened regularly. He filed the report and moved on. Then more reports arrived. Fuel consumption spikes. Shipyard activity. Reserve formations activating. Fleet traffic increasing across every human sector. The pattern became harder to ignore. 3 days later Varric submitted an advisory notice to the Imperial Council. The response was dismissive. Humans were posturing. Nothing more. The Council had seen similar reactions before. Economic pressure. Military demonstrations. Political statements. The usual responses from nervous neighbors. Then the next intelligence packet arrived. This one contained actual numbers. Varric read them once. Then again. Then a third time. His face slowly lost color. 700,000 warships. The report claimed humanity was mobilizing more military power than had ever been assembled in recorded galactic history. The number had to be wrong. It had to be. No empire possessed fleets that large. No economy could sustain them. No government could coordinate them. Yet every independent source confirmed the same conclusion. The numbers were real. Varric immediately marked the report urgent. Not important. Not high priority. Urgent. The highest classification available. Hours later he stood before the Imperial Council. The chamber was filled with politicians. Administrators. Expansion directors. Powerful people. People accustomed to being feared. Varric activated the display. The room became quiet. Human fleet positions appeared. Then ship counts. Then mobilization estimates. One council member laughed. Another assumed the report was exaggerated. A third accused the intelligence service of panic. Varric allowed them to finish. Then he showed the evidence. Sensor logs. Traffic records. Satellite observations. Intercepted military communications. The laughter disappeared. The room became silent. Very silent. One council member finally spoke. How certain are you? Varric answered immediately. 98%. Another pause. Then. What exactly are the humans doing? Varric looked around the room. For the first time in his career he struggled to find reassuring words. Finally he answered honestly. They are preparing for war. The council chamber remained silent long after the meeting ended. Because somewhere deep inside every member's mind, a terrible possibility had begun to form. Maybe Haven's Edge had not been another successful expansion. Maybe it had been a mistake. A very large mistake. And somewhere beyond the stars, the fleets kept coming. Every day. Every hour. Every minute. Growing larger. Growing closer. Like a storm moving across the galaxy. And for the first time since the conquest of Haven's Edge, the Xeroc Imperium felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The Imperial Council met 3 times in a single day. That had never happened before. For nearly 2 centuries, the Xeroc Imperium had expanded without serious opposition. Worlds submitted. Governments negotiated. Enemies retreated. The pattern had become so familiar that many council members no longer questioned it. Power felt permanent when it lasted long enough. Now that illusion was beginning to crack. Director Varric stood before the council chamber once again. The latest intelligence reports floated above the central table. No one laughed anymore. No one dismissed the numbers. The evidence had become overwhelming. Human fleets were still mobilizing. Still assembling. Still growing. And according to every projection, they would soon begin moving toward Xeroc territory. Counselor Theron broke the silence. What do they want? The question sounded strange. For generations, the Xeroc Imperium had been the one asking that question about others. Now they were asking it about humanity. Varric answered carefully. Based on intercepted communications, their primary demand appears to be the evacuation of Haven's Edge. A few counselors visibly relaxed. That sounded manageable. A territorial concession. A political settlement. The sort of thing empires negotiated all the time. Then Varric continued. However, intelligence analysts believe the colony itself is no longer the primary issue. The room became quiet again. What does that mean? Theron asked. Varric activated another display. Historical incidents appeared. Border disputes. Territorial claims. Expansion campaigns. Patterns stretching back 30 years. The humans believe this was not an isolated action. He pointed at the display. They believe it was part of a long-term expansion strategy. Another counselor frowned. Because it was. Nobody argued. Everyone knew it was true. The Imperium had been testing human borders for decades. Slowly. Carefully. Always looking for weakness. Always pushing a little farther. The problem was that this time they had pushed too far. Far too far. Meanwhile, aboard the flagship U.S. Vanguard, Admiral Sarah Holt received another intelligence update. The report contained intercepted Xerox communications, emergency meetings, fleet recalls, political disagreements. The enemy was frightened. Exactly as expected. Not because of battles. Not because of casualties. Because of possibility. Fear was most powerful before the first shot was fired. When imagination did the work. When uncertainty became a weapon. The Admiral studied the reports. Then she issued a single order. Continue mobilization. Nothing else. No speeches. No threats. No public statements. The fleets would speak for themselves. Back in Xerox space, the panic continued spreading. Military commanders began asking questions. Sector governors demanded explanations. Industrial leaders requested emergency briefings. Every day brought new rumors. Some claimed the human fleet numbered 200,000 ships. Others claimed 500,000. A few whispered that the real number exceeded 1 million. Nobody knew what to believe anymore. The uncertainty was becoming its own crisis. Then came the first images. Long-range surveillance probes captured footage from a human assembly point. The recording lasted only 12 seconds. 12 seconds was enough. The footage showed ships. Thousands of ships. So many that the camera couldn't capture the entire formation. The recording spread through military networks within hours. Senior officers watched it. Analysts watched it. Politicians watched it. And after watching it, very few people slept well. High Commander Kareth studied the footage alone. She had served the Imperium for 40 years. She had planned campaigns. Won battles. Crushed rebellions. She understood military power. Which was why she understood the danger better than anyone else. The problem wasn't merely the size of the fleet. The problem was what such a fleet represented. Organization. Industry. Preparation. Determination. Civilizations did not assemble 700,000 warships by accident. They did it because they had decided something mattered. And that realization frightened her more than the numbers. An aide entered her office. Commander. She looked up. What is it? The council requests your assessment. Kareth was silent for several seconds. Then she answered. Tell them the truth. The aide hesitated. The truth, Commander? Yes. She looked back toward the surveillance footage. Thousands of human warships drifting across the darkness. Like stars gathering for war. The truth is that we made a mistake. The aide froze. Kareth rarely spoke so directly. She continued. The colony operation should never have happened. The moment civilian settlements were targeted, the situation changed. Another pause. Then. And now we're going to pay for it. The aide left. The commander remained alone. Outside her office, the machinery of empire continued turning. Orders were issued. Reports were filed. Meetings were held. But beneath all of it, something fundamental had changed. Confidence was disappearing. The certainty that had fueled centuries of expansion was fading. Because for the first time in living memory, the Xerox Imperium had encountered something larger than itself. Something stronger. Something it could not intimidate. And far beyond the border, the human fleets began moving. The first formations entered transit corridors. Then the second. Then the third. Hundreds of thousands of warships crossing the darkness together. A tide of steel and fire. Heading directly toward Xerox space. Toward the empire that had burned Haven's Edge. Toward the leaders who still hoped there might be time to stop what was coming. There wasn't. The sleeping giant was no longer waking. It was already walking. The first human fleet crossed into Xerox territory 18 days after leaving the assembly zones. No battle greeted them. No massive defensive line. No glorious last stand. Only silence. Hundreds of thousands of warships emerged from faster-than-light transit and spread across the edge of Xerox space like a steel horizon. Every sensor station on the border immediately detected them. Every military commander saw the same impossible sight. The reports began arriving within seconds. 1,000 ships. 10,000 ships. 50,000 ships. The numbers kept climbing. Then the counting system stopped trying to track individual vessels. There were simply too many. Captain Darius Voss commanded Border Defense Station 12. For 20 years he had watched the frontier. Pirates. Smugglers. Military patrols. Trade disputes. He thought he had seen everything. Then he looked at the sensor screen. The human fleet filled it from edge to edge. It looked less like an army and more like a natural disaster. A storm front moving through space. His communications officer stared at the display. What are our orders? Darius already knew the answer. The station possessed 24 combat ships. The humans had arrived with more warships than existed in entire sectors. There was no military decision to make. Only survival. Open a channel. Minutes later, the station transmitted a surrender signal. Weapons powered down. Shields deactivated. Docking bays opened. On distant mining stations, entire shifts stopped working. Everyone asked the same question. Could the Imperium stop them? The answer became clearer each day. No. High Commander Kareth watched the situation deteriorate in real time. System after system reported surrender. Fleet after fleet refused engagement. Some commanders openly ignored orders to resist. Others claimed communication failures. A few simply disappeared. Fear was spreading faster than the human fleet itself. Because everyone could see the numbers. 700,000 warships. The largest military force ever assembled. And it was still moving. The Council demanded solutions. Kareth had none. Military mathematics were unforgiving. The Imperium possessed approximately 70,000 combat vessels. That number had once made them dominant. Now it looked tiny. Pathetic. Outdated. Against humanity's mobilized force, it was nothing. The realization shattered centuries of strategic assumptions. Meanwhile, aboard the UES Vanguard, Admiral Sarah Holt stood before the tactical display. Human formations now stretched across dozens of systems. The invasion had become too large for any single screen to display. Entire task groups operated independently. Carrier formations secured key transit routes. Drone fleets occupied communication hubs. Engineering units seized logistics networks. Everything happened according to plan. No unnecessary destruction. No civilian targets. No revenge killings. No atrocities. The objective wasn't extermination. The objective was understanding. The Xerox Imperium needed to learn a lesson so severe it would never be forgotten. And lessons required consequences. Colonel Rebecca Vance approached the Admiral. Latest update. Holt accepted the report. 3 additional military systems surrendered. 2 strategic shipyards captured intact. 7 communication relays secured. Enemy resistance minimal. The Admiral nodded. Exactly as expected. The Imperium was beginning to realize something important. This wasn't a border conflict. This wasn't a punitive expedition. This wasn't diplomacy backed by force. This was the collapse of certainty. For centuries, the Xerox had believed expansion carried little risk. Now that belief was dying. One surrendered system at a time. One abandoned fleet at a time. One terrified commander at a time. 3 weeks into the campaign, the human fleet reached the heavily fortified world of Nareth. The planet contained one of the largest military bases in the Imperium. 20,000 soldiers. 3,000 combat vessels. Orbital defenses capable of destroying entire fleets. At least on paper. When the human armada arrived, the base commander requested immediate communication. The channel opened. Admiral Holt appeared on the screen. The Xerox commander looked exhausted. Defeated. Older than his years. We surrender. No demands. No negotiations. No conditions. Just surrender. The transmission lasted 12 seconds. 3,000 warships powered down their weapons. The base opened its gates. And the human fleet continued forward. The road to the Imperial core was now open. Across the Imperium, panic turned into something worse. Doubt. Subject species stopped cooperating with Xerox authorities. Regional governors ignored orders. Supply chains began failing. Local administrations started preparing for life after the Imperium. The Empire wasn't collapsing because humanity destroyed it. It was collapsing because everyone suddenly realized it could collapse. That realization spread faster than any army. And now the human fleet was only a few transit jumps from the capital systems. The heart of Xerox civilization. The place where the decision to invade Haven's Edge had been made. The place where leaders once believed they controlled history. Ahead lay the throne worlds. Behind lay hundreds of surrendered systems. And between them moved 700,000 human warships. The march continued. And for the first time in 300 years, the Xerox Imperium understood what it felt like to be afraid. The Xerox Imperium did not collapse all at once. Empires never did. They cracked first. Then the cracks spread. By the time people noticed the damage, the collapse was already underway. The first signs appeared in the outer territories. Governors stopped responding to central authority. Military commanders ignored deployment orders. Entire systems began making decisions without consulting the Imperial Council. At first, officials in the capital dismissed the reports. Temporary disruptions. Communication delays. Administrative confusion. Nothing more. Then the reports multiplied. A mining sector declared neutrality. A border governor opened direct communication with Human Fleet Command. 3 subject species publicly announced that they no longer recognized Xerox authority. Within days, dozens more followed. The illusion of control was vanishing. And everyone could see it. In the capital world of Czar Prime, crowds gathered around public broadcasts. For generations, state media had portrayed the Imperium as unstoppable, invincible, the natural ruler of its region of space. Now those same broadcasts struggled to explain why human fleets occupied hundreds of systems, why military bases were surrendering, why entire sectors had gone silent. Questions spread faster than answers. Fear spread faster than questions. Inside the Imperial Council chamber, the atmosphere had become unbearable. The room that once echoed with confidence now felt like a funeral hall. Counselors sat in silence. No one argued anymore. No one spoke about victory. The debate was over. Reality had won. High Commander Kareth stood before the central display. Behind her floated a tactical map of the Imperium. Large sections glowed red. Human-controlled. Other regions flashed yellow. Unstable. Independent. Defecting. Only a shrinking core remained firmly under Imperial authority. The sight was devastating. 3 centuries of expansion. 3 centuries of conquest. 3 centuries of accumulated power. Unraveling in less than 2 months. Counselor Theron finally broke the silence. How long? No one needed clarification. How long until the humans reached the capital? How long until the end? Kareth checked the latest projections. 3 days. The room became very quiet. 3 days. The heart of the Imperium was only 3 days away from direct occupation. No one had imagined such a sentence would ever exist. Council head Valen looked exhausted. Older. Smaller. As if the weight of failure had physically changed him. He stared at the tactical display for a long time. Then he asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Can we stop them? Kareth answered immediately. No. No hesitation. No comforting lies. Just truth. The words seemed to echo through the chamber. No. Not maybe. Not unlikely. No. The Imperium could not stop the human fleet. The realization finally broke whatever resistance remained. One counselor lowered his head. Another closed her eyes. A third simply stared into space. The Empire was finished. Not destroyed. But defeated. And there was a difference. Far away, aboard the US Vanguard, Admiral Sarah Holt received another intelligence update. The report confirmed what she already suspected. The Xerox government was collapsing internally. Administrative systems failing. Military cohesion disappearing. Political authority evaporating. Colonel Rebecca Vance read the summary. They're done. Holt nodded. Yes. The colonel looked at the tactical display. Thousands of human task groups. Millions of personnel. The greatest military force humanity had ever assembled. We could reach the capital in 3 days. We could. Vance hesitated. Will we? The admiral didn't answer immediately. Instead she looked at another report. A transmission request. Priority level, diplomatic. Origin, Imperial Council. The request had finally arrived. The surrender offer. Humanity had expected it. The only surprise was how long it had taken. Holt slowly sat down. For a moment she thought about Haven's Edge. The market square. The schools. The families running toward shelters. Captain Elias Kane and his soldiers standing against impossible odds. The colony that had started everything. Then she activated the channel. The image of Council Head Valen appeared. He looked nothing like the confident leader who had approved the invasion months earlier. Failure had a way of changing people. Valen spoke first. We request formal negotiations. No speeches. No excuses. No threats. Just surrender hidden beneath diplomatic language. Holt studied him. Then answered. Are you prepared to accept terms? Valen closed his eyes briefly. A gesture of exhaustion. Yes. The word carried the weight of an empire. For several seconds neither side spoke. Across the galaxy fleets held position. Worlds waited. Entire civilizations waited. Finally Holt nodded. Then we will talk. The transmission ended. And with it ended the war. Not officially. Not yet. But everyone understood. The outcome was no longer in doubt. The guns were silent. The fleets had stopped. The empire had fallen. All that remained was deciding what would rise from its ashes. And across the stars, billions of people waited to learn the answer. The negotiations lasted 11 days. 11 days that would reshape an entire region of the galaxy. The talks were held aboard a neutral orbital station positioned between the human fleet and the Xerox capital systems. The location was chosen deliberately. Every viewport on the station overlooked space filled with human warships. Thousands upon thousands of them. A silent reminder of how the conversation had become possible. Council head Valen led the Xerox delegation. Across from him sat Admiral Sarah Holt and Ambassador Evelyn Ross, humanity's chief negotiator. Ross had spent 30 years resolving conflicts across human space. She spoke softly, calmly. The kind of voice people often underestimated. Until they realized she never lost an argument. The first day established the foundation. Humanity would not annex Xerox worlds. Humanity would not occupy the Imperium permanently. Humanity would not seek revenge against civilian populations. That announcement shocked the Xerox delegation. Many had expected conquest, humiliation, perhaps even destruction. Instead, humanity offered something else. A lesson. A painful one. But a lesson nonetheless. The terms were extensive. Every Xerox military force would immediately withdraw from Haven's Edge. All prisoners would be released. Every civilian displaced by the invasion would be returned home. The Imperium would fund reconstruction efforts. Every damaged building. Every destroyed farm. Every shattered school. Every family affected by the attack would receive compensation. The cost would be enormous. Yet humanity deliberately set the amount below the threshold that would collapse the Xerox economy. The goal was accountability, not extinction. Additional conditions followed. The Imperium would surrender all territories conquered by force during the previous 50 years. Subject species would gain the right to self-determination. Independent governments. Independent trade. Independent futures. No more forced expansion. No more territorial seizures. No more conquest disguised as policy. The Xerox delegation resisted at first. Then they reviewed the military situation. Resistance ended quickly. But one final clause generated the longest debate. It had been written personally by Admiral Holt. And unlike the others, it wasn't military. It wasn't economic. It wasn't territorial. It was historical. The clause required the Xerox Imperium to publicly acknowledge that the invasion of Haven's Edge had been an unjustified act of aggression against a civilian population. The statement would be broadcast throughout Xerox space. Recorded permanently. Taught in schools. Preserved in official archives. Valen read the clause repeatedly. Then he finally looked up. Why does this matter so much to you? The room became quiet. Admiral Holt folded her hands. Then she answered. Because memory matters. Valen remained silent. Holt continued. 30 years from now, another leader may look at a small colony and decide it's weak. They may convince themselves that conquest is practical. They may tell themselves the consequences will be manageable. She paused. And when that day comes, I want them to find this record. The room listened. I want them to read what happened. I want them to see the cost. And I want them to understand why they should never make the same mistake. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Valen slowly nodded. Because for the first time he understood. The humans hadn't crossed the galaxy for revenge. They had crossed it to make certain the lesson endured. The agreement was signed the following day. The war officially ended. Across the galaxy fleets began withdrawing. Task groups departed one at a time. Carrier formations returned home. Occupation zones were transferred peacefully. Border systems reopened. Trade resumed. The giant slowly went back to sleep. But nobody would ever forget that it had awakened. Months later, The first reconstruction convoy landed on Haven's Edge. The colony still bore scars. Burned buildings, damaged roads, empty homes. But life had returned. Children once again walked to school. Farmers returned to their fields. Merchants reopened stalls in the market square. Families gathered beneath the 3 pale moons. The world lived. Captain Elias Kane stood near the rebuilt memorial in the center of the colony. The names of every fallen defender were engraved into polished stone. Thousands of citizens had gathered around it. Some cried. Others simply stood quietly, remembering, honoring, healing. A young girl approached the memorial carrying flowers. She carefully placed them beneath the names. Then she looked up at Kane. Were we saved? The question caught him off guard. He looked around. The restored city. The repaired homes. The people living their lives again. Then he smiled. Yes. The girl nodded, satisfied, and ran back toward her family. Kane watched her go. For a long moment he said nothing. Above Haven's Edge, transport ships crossed a peaceful sky. The same sky that had once burned with war. The same sky that now carried hope. The colony had survived. Humanity had endured. And the galaxy had learned something important. Power was not measured by how much you could take. It was measured by what you chose to protect. The Xerox Imperium had looked at a small frontier colony and seen weakness. They had seen easy territory, easy people, easy victory. They were wrong. Because Haven's Edge was never just a colony. It was home. And when they threatened that home, they awakened an entire civilization. A civilization that crossed the stars. A civilization that moved 700,000 warships. A civilization that refused to forget. And long after the fleets returned home, long after the treaties were signed, long after the scars of war began to fade, the lesson remained. A warning written across history itself. Never mistake peace for weakness. And never threaten those who fight to protect their home.